Alrighty guys, Miss Miller here. If we go through, this is a video on factoring polynomials. It's a nice review to look at to see what type of factoring we will do depending on how many terms we have. The first thing you are always going to do is you are going to look for a GCF. Remember, that is the greatest common factor. If you need help on finding the greatest common factor, please look at the videos that I posted with the first set of notes. It goes over finding a greatest common factor if there's just numbers, as well as finding a greatest common factor when you have monomials as well. So please make sure you take a look at that. So if we go ahead and we look over here with four terms, we didn't go over any grouping, so you can ignore this over here. You might have four terms where you have to look for a greatest common factor, but most of the time it'll either be 2 or 3. So if we look and we go through, we had 3 terms, and there was 3 different types of trinomials, right? We had trinomials with x squared plus bx plus c. We also had trinomials with ax squared plus bx plus c. So that was when a was something other than 1. So we will go over those two here in a bit. The first type of example I want to go over, though, is going to be our difference of squares. Our difference of squares has to have 2 different things. So let's zoom in and talk about that. So difference of squares requires 2 different things. The first thing that we need goes with the part difference. We need subtraction. The second thing we need is the squared part, so we need perfect squares. And remember, a perfect square is something when I take the square root of it, I get a whole number. If I go through and I have a squared minus b squared, and both of these things are true, it ends up factoring as a plus b times a minus b. So you still factor it into 2 binomials. So if we go through and we look here at the first one, the square root of x squared is equal to x, and the square root of 64 is equal to 8. So we do have a difference of squares. So my answer is going to be x plus 8 times x minus 8. If we look at this second one, the second one has the greatest common factor. So remember, when I said we were trying to find the greatest common factor, we look at the smallest number, which is a 2, and we go ahead and we are trying to see what factors of 2 18 also shares, and that's going to be 2 because 18 is an even number. Then I look at my variables. The first term has an m, but the second term does not. So now the only thing I'm looking at comparing are my n's. I have n cubed and n to the first power, so I have 2n as my GCF. So once I factor that out, now I'm dividing my original term by my greatest common factor. So I end up with 9m squared minus n squared. And now what's left on the inside is a difference of squares. So I have 3m plus n times 3m minus n. The last thing I have to do is bring down that 2n, and this is my final answer. So again, difference of squares have 2 terms, and they factor in this form here, where it's a plus b times a minus b. The second type of problem that we're going to go over is when we have a trinomial that is x squared plus bx plus c. So our helpful hint box tells us that we need to find factors of c that add up to be b. So remember, that's what multiplies to be c and adds to be b. So if we look through this one, this first example does not have a GCF, so we don't have to worry about that. So we need what multiplies to be 42 and adds to be a -1. So if we have 42, I'm looking through and I have 1 and 42, 2 and 21, 3 and 14, and 6 and 7. Well, if I'm looking through, I know I'm going to have two binomials, and I know that x times x gives me x squared. Now, because c is negative, I mean that final term here is a -42. That means that my symbols are going to be one positive sign and one negative sign. So that means I'm going to have subtraction, and I need to find a -1. So 1 minus 42, that gives me -41. That can't work. 2 minus 21 is -19. That doesn't work. 3 minus 14 is going to be -11, so we're getting closer, but still not it. But 6 minus 7 gives me that -1. So I have a +6, a -7. So my final answer is x plus 6 times x minus 7. Again, you can check your answer always by doing the double distributive property and combining like terms to see if you get the original problem. For the second problem here, we do have a GCF. If we look, 2 is the smallest coefficient, and since they are all even, we can factor out a 2. The first two terms have a W, but because the last term is just a constant, 2 is my only GCF. So when I go and I factor that out, I'm left with W squared plus 10W plus 25. So now I have to go through and I have to factor the inside trinomial. So I'm factoring it into two binomials. Since I have two plus signs, I'm going to have W plus a number times W plus a number. And now I have to figure out what multiplies to be 25 but adds to be 10. 25 is either 1 and 25 or 5 and 5. 5 plus 5 is 10, so I have 5 and 5. So the last part that I need to do here is I need to simplify my answer. I bring down my greatest common factor, which is 2. And then because I have two W plus 5s, I actually write that as W plus 5 squared. The last type of example that we're going to go over is if we have a trinomial where we have ax squared plus bx plus c. Remember, I taught you two different ways to do this one. We did slip and slide, and then we also did take out the trash. So we're going to go over both of those. I'm going to do slip and slide first. So if we look here at this example, 30x squared minus 27x plus 6, the first thing we have to do is we need to look for a GCF. And we did that. If we look for our GCF is actually going to be 3. All right, so I'm left with 10x squared minus 9x plus 2. And I know I did that correctly because what's left on the inside do not share any other factors but 1. So when I go through, I am now going to factor the inside portion, which is a trinomial, right? And I'm going to do slip and slide. Slip and slide tells me that I multiply A times C, and I'm slipping that to the end. So I now have x squared minus 9x plus 20. Because I have a positive C and a negative B, I'm going to have two negative terms on the inside of my binomial. Now, I need to list out my factors of 20. I have 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. And I need to select the numbers that add up to be a 9. So 4 plus 5 is 9. Now, I'm not done yet. the next step of slip and slide is I have to divide by the number that I slipped over. So I'm dividing both of my factors by 10. Once I do that, I need to simplify. So when I simplify my fraction, I get x minus 2/5 times x minus 1/2. The last thing that you have to do is you slide your denominators back in front of the variables. So I have 5x minus 2 times 2x minus 1. The last thing I need to do is I need to bring down that greatest common factor, which was a 3. So my answer is 3 times 5x minus 2 times 2x minus 1. Now, if I did it using take out the trash instead, so again, over here was slip and slide. If I want to do take out the trash, let's look and see how these steps would differ a little bit. So I'm still going to have that same problem that I'm starting with. So 3 times 10x squared minus 9x plus 2, because finding that GCF is the same. But now, let's go over if we did take out the trash. If we did take out the trash, we're still starting with the same process where we're doing 10 times 2, which gives me 20. And I'm still going to need those factors of 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5. I'm still going to have two binomials, and since C is positive and B is negative, I have two negatives. And then I still need to select the 4 and the 5 because 4 plus 5 will give me 9. But now, instead of putting just x and x in here, now I look and I take the first term. I ignore the squared and I put 10x in the first term of each binomial. Now I am going through and I'm going to divide by the GCF of the first binomial. So I have 10 and 4. So the GCF of that one is 2. So I'm left with 5x minus 2. For the second binomial, I have 10 and 5. So I'm going to divide both of those by 5. So I get 2x minus 1. Still have to bring down my GCF. So I get 3 times 5x minus 2 times 2x minus 1. And if we compare that to what we got with slip and slide, we got the same answer. So we know we did that correctly. All right, guys, this is a great resource for you to look at. All right, taking out the trash, slip and slide, difference of squares. This video should help you go through and look at that lovely graphic organizer to help you study and decide which method to use for factoring. So I hope this video helps you out. Please make sure you study for your test on Friday, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks.